This episode of From feels like the town is no longer hiding behind mystery. It is starting to push directly on people's wounds, and that is what makes this chapter so unsettling. Not just the monsters, not just the symbols, not just the clues, but the way this place knows exactly where to hurt people the most. Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Breakdown Epic. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Now, on the surface, this episode might not look like the biggest chapter of the season so far. There's no giant action sequence taking over the whole hour. There's no simple reveal that answers everything. But in my opinion, this is one of the most important episodes yet, because it deepens almost every emotional fault line in the story at the same time. It pushes grief harder. It makes the man in yellow feel more invasive. It gives Boyd some of his most painful material in a long time, and it puts Victor right back near the center of the mystery where he belongs. I want to start with Elgin and Fatima because that reunion is one of the most uncomfortable scenes in the episode, and it should be. These two are tied together by some of the darkest events the show has explored recently. Kidnapping, manipulation, trauma, the birth of something monstrous, the murder of Tilly, and on top of all of that, there is still the pressure of the town not knowing the full truth.
That is what makes the whole situation feel so unstable. People are not just living with trauma, they are living with hidden trauma. The town is trying to avoid tearing itself apart, so the ugliest truths are being kept below the surface. And that means people like Elgin and Fatima are being forced into a kind of false normality that nobody in real life could actually sustain. What I found fascinating here is Fatima's reaction. The easy version of this scene would have been pure rage, total rejection, a refusal to even look at him. But the show goes in a more tragic direction. She seems to understand that this place used both of them. That does not excuse what happened. It does not erase anything, but it changes the emotional shape of the scene. It tells us Fatima is no longer trying to process this world through normal rules, because Fromville has broken those rules completely. In my personal opinion, that makes her one of the most emotionally interesting characters right now. She is not healed, she is not okay, but she is adapting to horror in a way that feels frighteningly believable for this town. Now, let's shift over to Boyd, because this episode is basically an emotional ambush for him. Boyd is haunted all over again by Abby and the day everything broke. And what makes that so painful is that the show is not using Abby as just a memory. It is using her as a pressure point. Every time Boyd starts to regain some control, the town finds a way to drag him back to the same trauma and ask whether he really learned anything from it.
That is where Acosta becomes important. At first, some people thought Acosta was simply being set up as a divisive presence in town, someone impulsive enough to turn people against Boyd. But this episode suggests something deeper. Boyd sees Abby in her. Not literally, of course, but psychologically. He sees the early signs of someone losing her grip, someone failing to adapt to this place, someone moving toward the same kind of dangerous logic that once convinced Abby that death was the way out. And that completely changes how we read Boyd's scenes with Acosta. He is not just trying to manage another difficult person. He is trying to stop another tragedy before it happens. He could not save Abby. He had to kill her. That is the wound. So now, if he sees even a shadow of that pattern returning in someone else, of course he is going to react. Of course he is going to try to intervene. In my opinion, this is one of the smartest emotional parallels the episode makes, because it gives Boyd a personal reason to care about Acosta beyond leadership or responsibility. It turns her instability into something intimate for him. Now, there is also that deeply creepy grave moment and the question of whether something is actually reaching for Boyd or whether the town is once again weaponizing his guilt through hallucination or some kind of supernatural projection. Personally, I do not think the show needs to fully explain that right now for the scene to work. The point is that Boyd feels it. Whether it is physically real or psychologically manipulated doesn't matter in the moment, because the fear and trauma are real. And honestly, that is something From does extremely well. It understands that terror does not always come from answering what something is. Sometimes it comes from showing how little the answer would actually change. Then we get the funeral, and this part of the episode is so much more important than I think some viewers will give it credit for. A funeral should be one of the few things this town still gets to have with dignity.
a moment to grieve, a moment to stop surviving and just feel the loss. But of course, Fromville is not allow that either. The crows arriving and gathering there completely change the emotional atmosphere. Suddenly, the burial is no longer just about mourning. It becomes a warning. Kenny pointing out that this kind of crow behavior is unusual matters a lot, because the show is telling us directly not to dismiss it as background creepiness. This is not random. It means something. Now, the obvious question is what that meaning actually is. Are the crows connected to the man in yellow? Are they servants of the town? Do they signal death? Do they observe? My personal opinion is that they are at the very least tied to surveillance and transition. They show up around shifts in the town's pattern, around arrivals, around moments when the town itself seems to be responding to human action.
So, even if they are not literally controlled in a simple magical sense, I do think they are part of the same intelligence network this place seems to operate through. And if the man in yellow is now moving more openly in the town, the idea that crows could function as extensions of his presence suddenly becomes much more believable. That takes us straight into Sophia and the larger danger of the man in yellow. What makes this character so effective is that the threat is not brute force, it is access. He has access to trust, access to private grief, access to emotional vulnerabilities. He does not need to come crashing in as a monster every time because he is far more dangerous slipping into conversations and nudging people in the wrong direction. And that is why scenes involving Sophia now carry so much tension, even when very little seems to be happening on the surface. We as the audience know something the town does not. Every interaction becomes contaminated by that knowledge. Every kind word sounds fake. Every emotional opening feels like it could be a trap. In my opinion, that is one of the smartest things the season is doing right now. It is turning ordinary scenes into suspense simply by changing who we know is standing in them. Now let's get to the part I found the most exciting, which is Victor, Ethan, and Jade. This trio is such a good combination because each of them represents a different way of reading the town. Ethan sees the world through story and symbolic logic. Jade sees pattern and obsession. Victor sees memory and instinct. Put those three together, and suddenly the mystery starts feeling less scattered and more connected.
The discovery tied to the man in yellow is where the episode really starts to push forward for me. Because this is not just another random clue in the woods. It feels deliberate. It feels placed. It feels like something the town or the entity wanted them to find. And that raises a huge question. If the shirt or the object connected to the man in yellow was meant to be found, was it left there as a breadcrumb, a test, or a memory trigger? I honestly lean toward memory trigger. Victor has always felt like a character carrying answers he cannot fully access yet. His drawings, his reactions, his sudden discomfort around certain images or places, all of it suggests that his mind is protecting him from truths that are still buried. So when something connected to the man in yellow appears and Victor is there for it, I do not think that is accidental. I think the show is moving him toward a point where repressed memory and present danger finally collide. And that opens the door to an even bigger theory. What if the man in yellow is not a fixed identity? What if it's just one face the entity has chosen to wear? That possibility really fascinates me because it reframes the mystery entirely. Instead of asking who the man in yellow is, we start asking how many times this thing has entered the cycle under different forms. How many false faces has it used? How many people has it watched? How many tragedies has it been standing behind?
If Victor or even Eloise saw this figure years ago, then we may finally be getting closer to understanding how deep this thing's roots actually go. And that is where the larger mythology starts to feel like it is tightening. We still have mentions and echoes of the Lake of Tears. We still have children's story logic bleeding into reality. We still have objects carrying symbolic weight far beyond what they should. This episode does not answer all of that directly, but it absolutely gives the feeling that these things are part of one network rather than separate mysteries. That is why I think this is one of those episodes that becomes more important the longer the season goes on. It may not feel explosive in a traditional sense, but it is laying emotional and mythological groundwork at the same time. By the end of the hour, the picture looks like this. Elgin and Fatima are trying to figure out how to exist after unimaginable trauma. Boyd is being dragged back into the worst day of his life while trying not to let Acosta become another Abby.
The funeral shows that even grief is being watched. Sophia continues to poison ordinary spaces simply by being in them. And Victor is getting closer to a piece of the puzzle that may have been buried inside him for decades.
In my personal opinion, that is a very strong episode of From. It is not flashy, it is not trying to shock every 5 minutes. It is doing something better. It is making the town feel smarter, older, and more emotionally cruel than ever. But anyway, that is my breakdown of From Season 4, Episode 3, and what I think it is really setting up moving forward. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Do you think the crows are acting as the man in yellow's eyes? And do you think Victor is about to remember something that changes the entire story? I'll catch you in the next one.